women, the 19th Amendment would not have been passed in 1920. Women's fight for suffrage in upstate New York predated what many regard as a formal starting point for women's suffrage. Usually people think of Seneca Falls as being the starting point, but in fact, many other women in places we probably will never know of started to struggle for women's suffrage even before 1848, when the Seneca Falls Convention was called. One group of women, actually about 6 of them, lived way up north in Jefferson County, and they were farmers' wives and daughters who had bought or maybe inherited land, and they believed since they were paying taxes, they should have the right to vote. So it's women like these that we also need to keep in mind, along with our more well-known leaders. Most early suffragists, and Eliza Wright Osborne was one, did not live to see the 19th Amendment come to fruition. Stanton and Anthony and Matilda Jocelyn Gage, some of the other big names in the suffrage movement, were also gone by that time. It is worth noting, though, that the 19th Amendment was a victory for the suffrage movement without saying. However, it's also worth noting that it did not give the right to vote to all American women. There were huge numbers of women that were left out, particularly in the American South. Both black and white women were disenfranchised until at least the 1960s. Also, Native American women did not vote in their entirety in this country until 1962. So, again, we need to keep these points prevalent in our minds. Although not common knowledge, the work of Eliza Wright Osborne and Emily Howland can be directly linked to the passage of the 19th Amendment and by extension to women's political and economic rights today. We have come together, both women and men, to recognize Eliza Wright Osborne and Emily Howland, 2 suffrage leaders who represent the collective efforts, of generations of Cayuga County women. On the long road to women's suffrage, both Eliza and Emily helped establish the Auburn branch of the Women's Educational and Industrial Union in 1882. The main branch was established in Boston, and I need to do some more checking, but I think the Auburn branch was the very second branch in the country, even though Buffalo claims that branch as theirs being the second. So we need to do some more research here. It was originally located at 25 William Street, and Eliza Osborne, the first president of the organization, bought more expansive property at 25 South Street following the death of her husband, David. Apparently, her husband was not a huge supporter of women's suffrage, so after he died, she became a much more determined and supportive activist than she already was. In addition to the stately Osborne Hall, which was used for large gatherings such as lectures, banquets, and stage productions, the Union eventually housed a library, a cafe, a lounge, a pool, a gym, a dorm, and a smoking room for men only. Women were not legally allowed to smoke anywhere at the time that the Union was established, and for much afterwards as well. Women were arrested in New York City in 1904 for smoking. The Union provided a safe space for working women, many of whom were recent immigrants, who worked at the silk mills, the linen mills, the woolen mills, and also what were called the button manufactories that were prevalent at the time. They employed a lot of, especially young single and some working married women as well, and widows. They worked very long hours for low pay. So the Women's Educational and Industrial Union gave them a place to come for some relief. And not only that, probably most importantly, it offered classes for them so that they could learn, if they didn't already know, which many of them did, to sew, to cook. They learned literature, and especially English language classes, because remember, many of these are recent immigrants and not English speakers, so they were encouraged to become citizens. And they realized, these young working women, for the most part, that once they became citizens, the vote would help improve their overall lives. So they became suffrage supporters through Emily and Eliza, and also the other women who worked with them's efforts. In 1891, less than a decade after the Women's Educational Industrial Union was founded, this time with help from the New York State Women's Suffrage Association, the dynamic duo, as I call Eliza and Emily, established the Cayuga County Political Equality Club at 9 Exchange Street that Chuck mentioned as the site of the other marker. Led by Emily Howland, the Political Equality Club joined what would eventually be 450 local suffrage organizations that affiliated with both the New York State Association and the big organization, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which provided the foundation for suffrage. Eliza Wright Osborne and Emily Howland drew on their Quaker heritage and family resources to empower women through activism. Both humanitarians in their own right, their combined list of causes runs long, ranging from abolitionism through suffrage to peace activism and beyond. As Emily once remarked, our opportunity is a measure of our responsibility. At a time when most Americans subscribe to the idea that, quote, women's place is in the home, unquote, Osborne and Howland stepped out into the world. They opened their homes for the cause of suffrage. The Osborne home became a center for suffrage meetings and gatherings. In 1901, Eliza Osborne hosted over 200 people at her home that were part of the New York State Women's Suffrage Association state convention. Howland's home, Tanglewild, became a retreat for suffragists traveling on the suffrage circuit. The two women made substantial contributions of time and money to win women's suffrage. Osborne and Howland were the two largest financial donors to the campaign for women's suffrage in New York State. They are among the millions of determined women who, for well over a century now, have dedicated their energy and resources to improve lives of all women. Today we honor their legacies and the legacies of all who work towards women's suffrage. It is in the enduring spirit of Eliza Wright Osborne and Emily Howland that the fight to ensure our hard-won rights rages on. Thank you.